Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful where you are. Let me know in the comments how things are, please. I was going to start off today with a discussion about the Mistborn trilogy because I finished it last week and I wanted to talk about it, but we're going to put that on hold until probably tomorrow. And today I want to talk to you about my D&D game that I ran this weekend. If you've been following along over the past few months, my friend Ignacy, who lives in Poland, asked me to run a classic American Dungeons and Dragons adventure for him for his birthday. His birthday's, this month, and he owns a board game company who used to publish role-playing games and a whole magazine about role-playing games. So this man literally wrote the book on role-playing games, but he had never played American Dungeons and Dragons. The games that they play in Poland are much more narrative-driven, and he wanted the experience of that like old-school D&D kind of. The DM describes something to you, and then we roll some dice, kind of a game. So for the last couple of months, I've been piecing this adventure together for him. I've been learning how to hand draw dungeon maps, and then I've been learning how to, been learning the DM system of creating encounters that are balanced for the number of players that you have. I hadn't played D&D in 15 years, so I had a lot of catching up to do, so I went and bought the books and I read and all that stuff. And I ran the game this past Saturday. And I hadn't really intended to talk about it, but then Jonathan asked if I could talk about my setup and that sort of stuff. So yeah, Ignacy lives in Poland. All of the players that participated are in Poland, and we thought about maybe using something like Roll20 or Tabletop Simulator or one of those things, but I just, as always with me, I procrastinated. And Ignacy is very similar to me. He works kind of like one day ahead or 2 days ahead. So he put together that we were doing this thing like Wednesday and asked people if they wanted to participate, and they said yes. So we only had like a couple of days to throw this thing together. And in that amount of time, I just could not figure out the software. What I'm really good at is hardware, is, making things in my shop. So I set about making tokens. I blew up my maps to full size, and I got a webcam. And so my setup was a couple of posts that were used that I built to make a green screen. I set one on either side of my table. I stretched a long piece of wood across them, something like this, and then I literally used a squeeze clamp and clamped one of my action cameras to it. In fact, the one that normally lives here that I've been doing shop videos with. I clamped that, just aiming down at the table. I was able to raise and lower it with two clamps on each side so that I could get the approximate amount of map showing based on one of the characters had dark vision, so I could get about 12 squares showing, or 24 squares showing at a time, or whatever it is. And we played over Zoom. So what I did, I had my front-facing camera facing me. I had the top-down camera facing the map. I could switch between those really easily on Zoom. There's I think it's Alt-N is the camera switching shortcut on Zoom, and they used they had their character sheets, they had their dice, I had my dice, I had tokens for all the monsters, and we played. And I had designed a really simple scenario. Essentially, it was a fetch type quest, like any online or single person RPG video game. It was a fetch quest. It was, you need to go here and get the thing. And so what I wanted to do was set the stage for a quick little scene where you're like, they show up at this inn. Everything is, have a good evening, we'll see you in the morning, and then in the middle of the night, of course, they get woken up, and there's some reason they can't leave the inn, and they had to go escape through the sewers. So I threw them into a dungeon within the first 10 minutes of playing. They ran through this dungeon. Here's the fun part. In this dungeon, the intention was they go down there, and they turn, and then they turn, and then they go towards the exit, right? The guy says, go here. My intention as the DM was they would get to that. There was a door in the way that they needed to find the key for. But I had set a difficulty for it. I set the difficulty at 22. I thought, that's really hard. And I think the thief rolled a 23. So I had fully intended on them needing or they had to go find the key. Like, this door was not unlockable. They unlocked it and just went on their way. They did no searching through the cave. There was other rooms. There was a couple of there was one other encounter down there. There was another trap. They set off the one trap there, which just made the guards alerted so that they were attacking. If they had not set the trap off in the exit, they would have surprised the guards and been able to take them out. But because they set the trap off, it was just like an alarm type trap. The guards were aware and engaged and that sort of stuff. So they had that encounter. And then they leave and they go to a town to get the item. And guess what? It's not there. The item is missing and it's somewhere else. You got to go find that. So they went to a town. They had a couple little encounters with some NPCs. They did some investigative work in a house. They found a riddle. I made them a little riddle. And they figured that out pretty quickly and then headed off into the mountains and found a cave. And then they had to explore this cave. There was a trap in the cave, but I had set it so that it was already triggered, so they could either choose to like follow the trap or go around it. They went around it. They got down to an area where there was quite a few. There was 2 or 3 encounters that I had set up in that area, and they avoided all of them and ended up finding what they needed and leaving. And so when on their way out, I decided to have I threw an encounter in, essentially, that wasn't written in. There was an encounter in the cave that they completely bypassed. So I just had that encounter attack them as if like they were on their way back to the base or whatever. And it worked out really well. Moving the map around on the table was a really easy way to kind of scroll, and I could manually put their counters on. They all, said move my guy, 2 forward and 1 left or whatever, so I could just quickly move their pawns. Having those little circular tokens was perfect for the top-down view on the webcam. It looked really nice. They could easily, determine what everything was. It worked out beautifully. It was a really fun adventure. It took us about 4 hours, which is an hour longer than I anticipated. And I guess if they would have done all of the encounters, it would have been significantly longer than 4 hours. So it's a much bigger adventure than I intended for it to be. But ultimately, they said they had a blast. I think that 2 of the players had played Dungeons & Dragons, but Ignacy himself had not. So this was his first experience, and he said it was exactly what he was expecting. He wanted to roll dice and figure things out, and I gave him one little puzzle, a couple of little role-playing scenarios, nothing major. And I ran it very similar to the way we used to run games in the 80s. I think I talked to our friend Rafal afterwards. He asked me a bunch of questions because he was like, I was really surprised. We talked about the role-playing aspect. Like in Poland, the role-playing is a much bigger thing. Everybody's in character, which is the way that I would normally play. But when I was a kid, when we played in the 80s, we did a whole lot of the players would say, well, innkeeper, do you have this? And then I would just, as the DM, tell them, well, the innkeeper tells you he's got a few things, blah, blah, blah. Not necessarily in character, I would just give them the kind of summary of what the innkeeper said. So I did that in this game. I did a couple of in-character moments, but I also peppered in the just descriptive, like, here's what he tells you. And they were kind of surprised by that because that wasn't the way that they're used to playing. But if I had tried to play out all of those scenarios in character, the game would have taken forever. So I think it worked out really well. Technologically, it was dumb simple. Just an extra camera and I could move a map around. I really like that option because there's nothing to figure out. Like, it's just moving things physically. And I'm good at that. So it worked. All in all, I'm excited about the idea of continuing this little adventure. I would like to someday package it and maybe offer it for download or sale or something. And it's supposed to be an introduction to a series. So we'll see. Maybe I'll someday wrap it up and make it available, or I'll just run it again. We'll see what happens. But that's how it went. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking and commenting and subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I will see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is compendious. It's an adjective meaning concise, succinct, and to the point. Sheila is unable to tell compendious stories about her trips to the Riviera. Compendious. COMPENDIOUS.